Now, a new group that aims to push back against the new homophobia of gender identity ideology has been set up. So the Gay Men's Network has been founded by Dennis Kavanagh, who is the legal commentator for Lesbian and Gay News. And Dennis joins me now. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Now, I want to talk to you about this new group that you're setting up, but before we do that, let's just explain to people, because I don't think people will understand what you mean. When you say that there is a sort of growing, a burgeoning homophobia, which has largely come out of this new gender identity ideology, what do you mean by that?
Well, what we mean is this. At the core of gender identity ideology is a very simple proposition that's seductive and it looks attractive, but it's in fact very dangerous. And you can boil it down to this. What's happening, what's being taught in schools around the country is this. If you're a gender non-conforming boy, if you're camp, if you're artistic, if you're autistic, if you're not big and macho, then that's evidence, some will say, that you are in fact a female. And the contrary applies to butch girls.
Like tomboys and that kind of thing.
Exactly. This isn't just an academic thing, sadly. We know that at the premier gender clinic in the United Kingdom, the Tavistock, the safeguarding lead, Sonia Appleby, was so concerned about homophobia as a safeguarding issue. She ended up taking that clinic to a tribunal as a whistleblower. And it was clear evidence before the court that homophobia was fueling some children being placed into gender clinics. And we are alarmed by that. We're terrified by that. And for many gay people, we look at that and we say, well, goodness me, that could have been us, and we need to do something about it.
See, people will say that they won't believe you when you say that, but I've seen evidence of this myself. I remember seeing that documentary, Transgender Kids, and where a man was interviewed, and he was talking about how, isn't it great that now I can see my daughter running, whereas I don't have to look at my little boy mincing about. That was basically what he said. And it's almost as though the homophobia can fuel that kind of... And actually, at the Tavistock Clinic, I believe there was a private joke amongst the people there that, soon there won't be any gay people left.
Well, the Times article that reports this begins with... it's a great article. It begins with the line, there was a dark joke amongst staff that soon there will be no gay people. And you
that's
read
real,
that,
right?
Yeah, that's real. That's a quote from their staff. And you read that as a gay man. And you think, well, that's your dark joke? Ha ha.
Yeah.
This is terrifying, that this is something that staff think is funny.
So the nub of gender identity ideology, then, the idea, I think Helen Joyce describes it as you have a kind of sexed soul within you. And so often, and not in all cases, but there are some activists who do, as you say, interpret traditionally feminine boys as being a girl trapped in a boy's body. But isn't this kind of quite regressive in terms of the conservative stereotypes of gender that it draws upon?
It's precisely that. You cannot have gender identity, and as you say, Helen Joyce says this, without really regressive 1950s stereotypes about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And so it's only right that there is now pushback against this, because, as you appreciate, this is an ideology that prima facie seems to have captured almost entirely the United Kingdom charity sector. They speak with one voice on this. They speak as in the style of unelected political parties, and they have the ear of government. And that's one of the reasons we've set up our organisation, which is similar to organisations like Sex Matters, which is an organisation that deals primarily just with biological sex characteristics, or lesbian fight back, or lesbian labour, because we want to say, look, this is regressive. And this is dangerous, and as was demonstrated in that case I mentioned, Appleby and Tavistock, this now amounts to a safeguarding issue for young gay people. Yeah. So us older generation of gay men, with our organisation and working with other organisations, want to stand up to this and say, look, this isn't right, this isn't the right way to treat children, and this is being fuelled by homophobia.
So then what do you say to people who say, well, but look, some kids will end up having gender dysphoria, so trans people were children once.
Yeah, of course.
So you know, isn't this... People will accuse you, I'm sad to say, of transphobia and hate.
Yeah, and that's a very common accusation. But, of course, what that misses out is that there are an enormous number of trans commentators who would agree with every single word I've just said. Trans people are not a monolith, in the same way that gay people are not a monolith. And plenty of decent trans people can see precisely what's going on here. You've had Debbie Hayton on here before, who I know would agree with every word of this. There are plenty of other trans commentators who take this view. So it's a lazy slur, just whenever you hear something you disagree with, to say that's hatred, that's a phobia. The point is, a court recognised that homophobia was a safeguarding risk.
Yes.
And we say... if that's the case, why on earth weren't the gay charities at the barricades saying, we have to do something about this? They weren't.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people, when we talk about Stonewall, for instance, they have a memory of Stonewall as being that group that campaigned for gay rights before we had equal age of consent, before we had equal marriage, before we had all of those things, right?
Yeah.
When Section 28 was there. So all of those great victories, Stonewall really were at the heart of that.
Absolutely.
But now on their website and in their promotional materials, they've changed the definition of homosexual to say that this doesn't mean same-sex attracted. This means same-gender attracted. And what they're meaning by that is that actually biology has nothing to do with same-sex attraction, whereas, of course, I would argue that at the core of the gay rights movement is an acknowledgement of biology.
Yeah, well, you would think so. And, you know, I try to be temperate in my language, but no one ever asked us gay people if we were OK with this. This change took place unilaterally in the corridors of power amongst an aristocratic class of charity people who turned around one day and said, no, you're not homosexuals anymore, you are homogendered. And I might add this, if I may. That is not only wrong and makes no sense. I'm not attracted to gendered souls. No one is. People are attracted in part to physicality. That's a normal part of humanity. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. But I would add this point as well. It's also discordant with legislation. The Equality Act, our protected characteristic, is of same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
So insofar as any charity pretends that the protected characteristic is anything else, they are far beyond the law in this area, and they're far beyond the reality and the lived reality of gay men.
But continually, that is the case. I mean, and a lot of people have levelled that accusation at Stonewall, saying you are representing the law as you would like it to be, not how it actually is. And I've even seen on police websites, when they talk about hate crime, they talk about protected characteristics, and it's gender identity is there. But that's not there in the 2010 Equalities Act, is it?
No, it's not. The protected characteristic is gender reassignment. I think it's Section 7. And look, this is dangerous. I had 15 years as a criminal barrister, and I was assiduously regulated in everything that I did, in every pronouncement I made, and in the ethics I was held to, and in the legal advice I gave. And we have this bizarre situation in this country where we have a charity sector and associated industries hanging off that provide this legal advice.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned what we get as a result of that. One only needs to look at police forces. Police forces, for goodness sake, who should know the law, getting it fundamentally wrong. And that tells us that whatever regulation is going on in this sector is failing.
So then what do we do about that? Because Stonewall, as we know, as a group, has found its way into all sorts of positions of influence, with the ear of government, into the police, as you say, particularly into schools, I have to say, as well. With that degree of power, and with them sort of propagating this idea of gender identity ideology, and it is very much an ideology, how do we push back against that? Especially because a lot of people don't understand the issues. They think they're just talking about what we used to call transsexuals or people with gender dysphoria. That's not what it's about, is it? Yeah,
that's absolutely right. It's a big task. I think the answer to your question is that we have a duty, particularly when we're dealing with things like the safeguarding issue of homophobia that I've mentioned, we have a duty, particularly as older gay men, to challenge this. But we recognise, as is the premise of your question, that we're dealing with something that's incredibly powerful, incredibly influential, and is spending the goodwill that Stonewall has built up over years and years and years and years and years. But it does seem to me the more and more extreme these organisations get, the more and more they hemorrhage credibility. We have Stonewall this week, for example, because it's fallen out with our equalities regulator, the ECHR, going to the UN to try and get it delisted from A-grade status to B-grade status.
Yes.
Now,
can you explain to us what happened there, what this group is?
Yeah, certainly. This is the Equality and Human Rights Commission of this country, and its job is to balance the protected characteristics, age, sex, race, you name it, sexual orientation, to try and provide advice that works for everyone in society, not just one group, not just one special interest, everyone. And it did that in respect of gender recognition in Scotland, and it did that in respect of the conversion therapy ban.
And what were they urging the Scottish Government in this?
Well, in the Scottish Government's case, they said, we think that you should pause for a moment because your redefinition of the word woman looks like it's going to cause a problem. And lo and behold, the Scottish Court of Appeal, I think just Friday, I think it was, said precisely that. They said the Scottish Government had tried to do exactly what the EHRC warned them about. But of course, rather than engage with that discussion, rather than say, maybe you've got a point, rather than say, let's sit down, let's just discuss this as adults, no. as you've averted.
But this goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that this assumption that anyone who wants a discussion about these very difficult issues, right, is either hateful or transphobic or something like this. I now don't know any gay people who think Stonewall supports them. Yeah. Something has really fundamentally changed. And I think they're, in a sense, sort of dining out on their older reputation. People don't know what is going on here. Is that right?
I think you're absolutely right. And in a way, you're echoing what Sir Trevor Phillips said in The Guardian, where he said, look, where is the old Stonewall? Yeah. Where's the Stonewall of Simon Fanshawe, of Angela Mason? The Stonewall that won equal marriage by sitting down and talking and being respectful and not construing any point of disagreement as hate. Because we cannot have legislation that functions on the basis of an accusatory denouncement of anyone with whom you disagree.
It's an irony to me that so many of the people who take your stance are accused of being hateful and transphobic when there's no evidence for any of that. It's just an assumption that's made. But the hatred that I do see a lot of the time online is coming from people who very much propagate gender identity ideology against gay people. And I've seen a kind of resurgence of a very old-fashioned kind of anti-gay hatred that invokes AIDS and things and talks about how homosexuals ought to, harm themselves and hurt themselves, and really vehement, vitriolic. And there's pages and pages of this stuff, and people don't believe it, but it's all been recorded. Yeah. Where is that coming from? Why this sort of... I mean, is there something, essentially, about this ideology that just not hates, but has a homophobic basis?
I think, yes, there is. And I think in the extreme core of it, this ideology is the perfect vehicle for your homophobia. I would add to that, to take Alison Bailey's name in vain, I think there is also racism at the heart of this as well. I also think, and Maya Forstater or anyone, if they would say this to you, there's misogyny at the heart of this as well.
In other words, not that every activist feels that way, but if you have those prejudices, this is a perfect excuse.
Absolutely. Right. I'm not saying for a moment that if you believe in a gender ideology, you are hateful. I mean, if I did that, I'd be doing exactly what I've accused Stonewall of. Yes. I don't take that view. But I agree with you. I've seen more appalling, as you say, AIDS-related, all sorts of, gay sex disgusts me type comments, which I haven't seen in donkey's years. I've seen more recently than I have in years and years and years. And do you know what? It doesn't affect me. I'm a middle-aged married man. I'm comfortable. I can scroll past this stuff on Twitter. What I worry about are young gay men reading this stuff, being told there are all sorts of horrible things, and then being told potentially that they're not real men.
Yes.
That's what I worry about. And this younger generation who have those pressures and have all the pressures of being part of the smartphone generation, all the body pressures that go with that, these are the people I worry about.
Yeah, because I mean, I would say, because you can find any rubbish on Twitter, people, but quite genuinely, the extent of this is quite incredible, and there are people who have captured screenshots of thousands and thousands of these kinds.
I'm on one of these.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very real thing, and like you, I thought we'd left those prejudices back in the 90s.
It's extraordinary, and every now and then when you lift the veil on this sort of thing, it is just appalling.
So remind us what your group is called and when you're setting up and what you're going to be doing.
It's called the Gay Men's Network. We're just in the process of formalising the organisation at the moment. We've already responded to a few government responses. We'll put that together on our website. We should have something up and running for people to look at if they're interested in about 7 to 14 days.